Hello and good morning. I'm pre-recording this so that there are no interruptions. I wasn't sure if I would be with my kids today or not, so I went ahead and pre-recorded this so that you all could follow along with the reading, make sure you get everything done, pause as you need to, and complete the work with minimal interruptions. So today we are reading Chapter 6 of Animal Farm. You're going to annotate with me. Then you're going to update your Animal Farm allegory chart assignment, as we can see on our agenda here. And then we're going to continue finding images for all the characters from Animal Farm and historical figures. So if you haven't finished doing that, you're going to continue doing that today. You should have plenty of time to get this done today. If you get done early, make sure you're going back and checking your grades, watch the news, fill your time, look and explore. So let's go over to the reading and look at that together. Let me get that set up for us. Yes, should be able to see that there. I want to keep myself in this corner here. So before we jump into the reading, let's talk about where we are in the book, okay? In our last chapter, Napoleon and Snowball were debating of whether or not they should build the windmill and which direction to take Animal Farm. Should they head towards building up the windmill and building and spreading power and renewing and building this up through this windmill, this very bold idea by Snowball. He had drawings in the tool shed and had all this ready to go and was very passionate about it, while Napoleon was very against it. They also disagreed on how they should concentrate their mission. So Snowball wanted to spread the information of the revolution to other farms around them, helping the rest of the area, the rest of England, to have a revolution, okay? While the opposite was happening with Napoleon. Napoleon said, no, we don't need to spread the idea of revolution. We need to protect ourselves. And we can see that historically this is a perfect allegory connection to Stalin and Trotsky. Trotsky wanted to have a world revolution of communism, which was a much closer in line with what Marx wanted, while Stalin wanted a superpower that was the Soviet Union and only wanted to grow its military might and nationalism and power. And we'll see how that plays out in World War II later, but we can see that very clearly. As far as the windmill goes, both Trotsky and Stalin wanted to help grow the industry of the Soviet Union, but Stalin will oust, just like Napoleon in the book, will oust Trotsky from power by framing him and basically making him look like he never had any good ideas. He was a traitor to Marxism, to communism, and that is what Squealer will do in the form of propaganda in Animal Farm. And in this last paragraph, we see that the propaganda of Squealer has turned the animals against Snowball and gives credit to the windmill idea and all the success of Animal Farm to Napoleon, which is exactly what Stalin does in the history of the Bolshevik Revolution, the Russian Revolution. And Stalin will come up with a 5-year plan to try to revolutionize and bring about change in the Soviet Union, and we'll see how Napoleon tries to do that as well. So let's jump into Chapter 6, see where this story takes us. We have looked at the history of the tyranny of Stalin and how he abused and used the ideas of communism to control and create a totalitarian government. And let's see what happens with Napoleon. Make sure you have a pencil and paper you're reading out. If you don't have your reading for some reason, make sure you're taking notes and following along, because I will be taking those up at the end of the project. So, here we go. All that year, the animals worked like slaves, but they were happy in their work. They grudged no effort or sacrifice, well aware that everything that they did was for the benefit of themselves and those of their kind who would come after them, and not for a pack of idle, thieving human beings. Remember, the human beings are still the enemy, okay? And they are displayed. Human beings are the enemy, okay? If we look at that allegorically to the Soviet Union, the humans represented that capitalism, okay? So we can put capitalism, okay? Something that's kind of directly against communism. Throughout the spring and summer, they worked a 60-hour week. So a normal work week is 40 hours. So they're working a 60-hour week. And in August, Napoleon announced that there would be work on Sunday afternoons as well. So they no longer are getting Sundays off. This work was strictly voluntary. But any animal who absented himself from it would have his rations reduced by half. So they could choose not to do that work, but they would lose their rations, okay? Even so, it was found necessary to leave certain tasks undone. The harvest was a little less successful than in previous years, than the previous year, and 2 fields which should have been sown with roots in the early summer were not sown because the plowing had not been completed early enough. It was possible to foresee that the coming winter would be a hard one. The windmill presented unexpected difficulties. There was a good quarry of limestone on the farm, and plenty of sand and cement had been found in one of the outhouses, so that all the materials for the building were at hand. But the problem the animals could not first solve was how to break up the stone into pieces of suitable size. There seemed no way of doing this except by picks and crowbars, which no animal could use, because no animal could stand on its hind legs. Only after weeks of vain effort did the right idea occur to somebody, namely, to utilize the force of gravity. Huge boulders, far too big to be used as they were lying all over the bed of the quarry. The animals lashed ropes around these, and then all together, cows, horses, sheep, any animal that could lay hold of the rope, even the pigs sometimes, could join in at critical moments. They dragged them with desperate slowness up the slope to the top of the quarry, where they were toppled over the edge, to shatter to pieces below, transporting the stone when it was once broken and comparatively simple. The horses carried it off in cart loads. The sheep dragged single blocks. Even Muriel and Benjamin yoked themselves into an old governess cart and did their share. By late summer, a significant store of stone had accumulated, and then the building began under superintendence of the pigs. So we're seeing that the windmill, this progressive change in the farm, is happening, but progress is slow. Progress is slow and painful. So just like in the Soviet Union, the people are having to work and work and work, united under this idea that Stalin has created to catch up and modernize Russia, the Soviet Union. And it works. There is modernization in the Soviet Union, but it is on the back of heavy, heavy, heavy work. All right, flip the page. But it was a slow, laborious process. Frequently, it took a whole day of exhausting effort to drag a single boulder to the top of the quarry, and sometimes when it was pushed over the edge, it failed to break. Nothing could have been achieved without Boxer. So remember, Boxer represents the working class, the workers, okay? Nothing could be done without Boxer, whose strength seemed equal to that of all the rest of the animals put together. When the boulder began to slip and the animals cried out in despair at finding themselves dragged down the hill, it was always Boxer who strained himself against the rope and brought the boulder to a stop. To see him toiling up the slope inch by inch, his breath coming fast, the tips of his hooves clawing at the ground, and his great sides matted with sweat filled everyone with admiration. Clover warned him sometimes to be careful not to overstrain himself, but Boxer would never listen to her. His two slogans, "I will work harder" and "Napoleon is always right," seemed to him a sufficient answer to all problems. He had made arrangements with the cockerel to call him 3/4 of an hour earlier in the morning instead of a half hour, and in this his spare moments, of which there were not many nowadays, he would go alone to the quarry, collect a load of broken stone, and drag it down to the site of the windmill unassisted. So this um, progress is on progress is on the backs of the workers. Okay, the workers are doing this. They are making this progress. They are working themselves to death, and we're going to find out what happens here. The animals were not badly off throughout that summer, in spite of the hardness of their work. If they had no more food than they had in Jones's day, at least they did not have less. The advantage of only having to feed themselves and not having to support 5 extravagant human beings as well was so great that it would have taken a lot of failures to outweigh it. And in many ways, the animals' method of doing things was more efficient and saved labor. Such jobs as weeding, for instance, could be done with a thoroughness impossible to human beings. And again, since no animal now stole, it was unnecessary to fence off pasture from arable land, which saved a lot of labor on the upkeep of the hedges and gates. Nevertheless, as the summer wore on, various unforeseen shortages began to make themselves felt. There was a need of paraffin oil, nails, string, dog biscuits, and iron for the shoes, so horses' shoes, none of which could be produced on the farm. Later, there would also be need for seeds and artificial manures, besides various tools, and finally the machinery for the windmill. How these were to be produced, no one was able to imagine. One Sunday morning, when the animals assembled to receive their orders, Napoleon announced that he had decided upon new policy. From now onwards, Animal Farm would engage in trade with the neighboring farms. Not, of course, for any commercial purpose, but simply in order to obtain certain materials which were urgently necessary. The needs of the windmill must override everything else, he said. He was therefore making arrangements to sell a stack of hay and part of the current year's wheat crop, and later on, if more money were needed, it would have to be made up by scale of the sale of eggs, for which there was always a market in Willingdon. The hens, said Napoleon, should welcome this sacrifice as their own special contribution towards the building of the windmill. So we see here that the animals need to reach out to humans. Okay, they need to begin building that relationship with humans so that they could build and continue to actually be able to upgrade and survive on the farm. This is seen in the Soviet Union. This is seen in which Stalin will begin to work with other countries in trade and in manufacturing to build up the power of the Soviet Union. Once again, the animals were conscious of a vague uneasiness, never to have any dealings with human beings, never to engage in trade, never to make use of money. Had not these been amongst the earliest resolutions passed by the first triumphant meeting after Jones was expelled? So this trade, this opening up to other countries is against animalism, is against Marxism. They're not supposed to be doing this. So this is contradictory to what Marx or Old Major would have wanted. Okay, so this is uneasy. Okay, never to make use of money, never to deal with humans, never to engage in trade. All the animals remembered passing such resolutions, or at least they thought they had remembered it. The 4 young pigs, who had protested when Napoleon abolished the meetings, raised their voices timidly, but they were promptly silenced by a tremendous growling from the dogs, threat of the dogs. Then, as usual, the sheep broke into 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and the momentary awkwardness was smoothed over. Finally, Napoleon raised his trotter for silence and announced that he had already made all the arrangements. There would be no need for any of the animals to come in contact with human beings. So no outsiders would come in contact with the animals, which would clearly be most undesirable. He intended to take the whole burden upon his own shoulders. A Mr. Whymper, a solicitor living in Willingdon, had agreed to act as the intermediary between Animal Farm and the outside world, and would visit the farm every Monday morning to receive his instructions. Napoleon ended his speech with his usual cry of "Long live Animal Farm," and after singing "The Beast of England," the animals were dismissed. So Mr. Whymper represents the capitalist countries that would trade with the Soviet Union, and they would get incredibly wealthy from this trade. So Mr. Whymper, and he's not in our allegorical chart, but it's good to note that he represents wealthy capitalists that work with Stalin. Okay. And they're going to become very wealthy, as well as Stalin is going to make a lot of money from this dealing. And notice that he says that Napoleon, will be the only one in contact with Mr. Whymper. Okay. Afterwards, Squealer made a round of the farm and set the animals' minds at rest. He assured them that the resolution against engaging in trade and using money had never been passed or even suggested. So he's rewriting history with this propaganda. Never been passed or even suggested. It was pure imagination, probably traceable in the beginning to lies circulated by Snowball. So all putting it back on Snowball. A few animals still felt faintly doubtful, but Squealer asked them shrewdly, "Are you certain that this is not something that you have dreamed, comrades? Have you any record or such as a resolution? Is it written down anywhere?" And since it was certainly true that nothing of the kind existed in writing, the animals were satisfied that they had been mistaken. So nothing in writing, okay? So this alludes to the fact that there was no clear constitution. Now, later we know that Stalin will incorporate his constitution, which is a very democratic paper, a very democratic writing, but gives no real power. Okay? So there's no real protection of this. Every Monday, Mr. Whymper visited the farm as had been arranged. He was a sly-looking little man with side whiskers, a solicitor in a very small way of business, but sharp enough to have realized earlier than anyone else that Animal Farm would need a broker and that the commissions would be worth having. The animals watched his coming and going with a kind of dread and avoided him as much as possible. Nevertheless, the sight of Napoleon on all fours delivering orders to Whymper, who stood on 2 legs, roused their pride and partly reconciled them in their new arrangement. Their relations with the human race were now not quite the same as they had been before. The human beings did not hate Animal Farm any less now that it was prospering. So this is an interesting point. Their relations with the human race not quite the same, but humans did not hate Animal Farm any less now that it was prospering. Indeed, they hated it more than ever. Every human being held it as an article of faith that the farm would go bankrupt sooner or later, and above all, that the windmill would be a failure. They would meet in the public houses and prove to one another by means of diagrams that the windmill was bound to fall down, or that if it did stand up, then that it would never work. And yet, against their will, they had developed a certain respect for the efficiency with which the animals were managing their own affairs. One symptom of this, one of their own affairs. One symptom of this was that they had begun to call Animal Farm by its proper name and ceased to pretend that it was called the Manor Farm. They had also dropped their championship of Jones, who had given up hope of getting his farm back and gone to live in another part of the county. Except through Whymper, there was as yet no contact between Animal Farm and the outside world. Except through Whymper, there was yet no contact between Animal Farm and the outside world. So this is an allegory to the fact that the world began respecting the Soviet Union, but there was still fear. Okay, they didn't want it to succeed. They talked about it not succeeding, and this idea of revolution and breaking down what they had was scary. Okay, big key here though is that while the world paid attention, animals didn't know. Okay, the people of Russia didn't know. Okay, and only through the government, only through Whymper and Napoleon, only through Stalin and these capitalists were there any communications. But there were constant rumors that Napoleon was about to enter into a definite business agreement with either Mr. Pilkington or Foxwood or Mr. Frederick or Pinchfield, but never it was noticed with both simultaneously. So we can see Napoleon kind of playing both sides. Kind of playing both sides. It was about this time that the pigs suddenly moved into the farmhouse and took up their residence there. Okay, so the pigs are going to move into the farmhouse, which was completely agreed upon that they should not be living in the farmhouse, and took up their residence there. Again, the animals seemed to remember that a resolution against this had been passed in early days, and again Squealer was able to convince them. So we see Squealer again spreading this propaganda, convince them that it was not the case. It was absolutely necessary, he said, that the pigs, who were the brains of the farm, should have a quiet place to work in. It was also more suited to the dignity of the leader. For of late, he had taken to speaking of Napoleon under the title of leader. To live in a house than in a mere sty. Nevertheless, some of the animals were disturbed when they heard that the pigs not only took their meals in the kitchen and used the drawing room as a recreation room, but also slept in the beds. Boxer passed it off as usual with Napoleon is always right. So Boxer, unquestioning, Napoleon is always right. But Clover, who thought she remembered a definite ruling against beds, went to the end of the barn and tried to puzzle out the 7 commandments, which were inscribed there. Finding herself unable to read more than the individual letters, she fetched Muriel. Muriel, she said, read the 4th commandment Does it not say something about sleeping in a bed? With some difficulty, Earl spelled it out. It says, "No animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets." No animal shall sleep in beds with sheets, she announced finally. Curiously enough, Clover had not remembered the fourth commandment mentioned sheets, but as it was there on the wall, it must have done so, and Squealer, who happened to be passing at this moment, attended by 2 or 3 dogs, was able to put the whole matter in its proper perspective. So they are changing the commandments. So they are changing what it means to have animalism. "You have heard then, comrades," he said, "that we pigs now sleep in the beds of the farmhouse. And why not? You did not suppose, surely, that there was ever a ruling against beds. A bed merely means a place to sleep in. A pile of straw in a stall is a bed, properly regarded. The rule was against sheets, which are a human invention. We have removed the sheets from the farmhouse beds and sleep between blankets. And very comfortable beds they are too, but not more comfortable than we need. I can tell you, comrades, with all the with all the brain work we have nowadays, you would not rob us of our repose, would you, comrades? You would not have us too tired to carry out our duties. Surely none of you wishes to see Jones come back, this continual threat of Jones. The animals reassured him on his point immediately, and no more was said about the pigs sleeping in the farmhouse beds. And when some days afterwards it was announced that from now on the pigs would get up an hour later in the mornings than the animals, no complaint was made about that either. So we can see that there are major changes, that these leaders, the pigs, are taking advantage of the people, or the other animals. And they are being corrupt. And we can see this slow, steady move back to corruption and lying and totalitarianism and control. By the autumn, the animals were tired but happy. They had had a hard year, and after the sale of part of the hay and corn, the stores of food for the winter were none too plentiful. But the windmill compensated for everything. It was almost half built now. After the harvest, there was a stretch of clear, dry weather, and the animals toiled harder than ever, thinking it well worth while to plod to and fro all day with blocks of stone. If by doing so they would raise the walls another foot, Boxer would even come out at nights and work for an hour or two on his own by the light of the harvest moon. In the spare moments the animals would walk round and round the half-finished mill, admiring the strength and perpendicularity of its walls and marveling that they should ever have been able to build anything so imposing. Only old Benjamin refusing to grow enthusiastic about the windmill, though, as usual, he would utter nothing beyond the cryptic remark, "Donkeys live a long time." November came. Make sure everything's recording. So yeah, November came with raging southwest winds. Building had to stop because it was now too wet to mix the cement. Finally, there came a night when the gale was so violent that the farm buildings rocked on their foundations, and several tiles were blown off the roof of the barn. The hens woke up squawking with terror because they had all dreamed simultaneously of hearing a gun go off in the distance. In the morning, the animals came out of their stalls to find that the flagstaff had been blown down and an elm tree in the front of the orchard had been plucked like a radish. They had just noticed when a cry of despair broke out every animal's throat. A terrible sight had met their eyes. The windmill was in ruins. With one accord, they had dashed down to the spot. The windmill was in ruin. With one accord, they dashed down to the spot. Napoleon, who seldom moved out of a walk, raced ahead of them. Yes, there it lay, the fruit of all their struggles, leveled to its foundations. The stones had broken and carried so laboriously, scattered all around, unable at first to speak. They stood gazing mournfully at the litter of the fallen stone. Napoleon paced to and fro in silence, occasionally snuffing at the ground. His tail had grown rigid and twitched sharply from side to side, a sign to him of intense mental activity. Suddenly, he halted as though his mind were made up. "Comrades," he said quietly, "do you know who is responsible for this? Do you know the enemy who has come in the night and overthrown our windmill? Snowball." He suddenly roared in a voice of thunder. "Snowball has done this thing. In the sheer malignity, thinking to set back our plans and avenge himself for his ignominious expulsions, this traitor has kept here under cover of night and destroyed our work of nearly a year. Comrades, here and now I pronounce the death sentence upon Snowball. Animal hero, second class, and half a bushel of apples to any animal who brings him justice, a full bushel to anyone who captures him alive." So, was it Snowball's fault? No. It was a natural disaster. Okay? And this is on the heels of Stalin's first 5-year plans. Okay? He will use ideas of Trotsky and capitalism to blame their issues on the farm or in the Soviet Union because of harsh winters, because of natural occurrences, because of just insecurity. Nothing would be his fault. Okay, so here we see Napoleon uses Snowball as a scapegoat. The animals were shocked beyond measure to learn that even Snowball could be guilty of such an action. There was a cry of indignation, and everyone began thinking out ways of catching Snowball if he should ever come back. Almost immediately, the footprints of a pig were discovered in the grass a little distance from the knoll. They could only be traced for a few yards, but appeared to lead to a hole in the hedge. Napoleon snuffed deeply at them and pronounced them to be Snowball's. He gave it as his opinion that Snowball had probably come from the direction of Foxwood Farms. "No more delays, comrades," cried Napoleon. "When the footprints had been examined, there is work to be done. This very morning we began rebuilding the windmill, and we will build all through the winter, rain or shine. We will teach this miserable traitor that he cannot undo our work so easily. Remember, comrades, there must be no alteration in our plans. They shall be carried out to the day. Forward, comrades. Long live the windmill. Long live Animal Farm." So we see in the end that Napoleon is going to continue to push in the worst part of the year to continue to build the windmill. And we can see here it was a bitter, bitter cold winter starting in chapter 7, so we can see some pain coming ahead. We're going to stop there. If you want to continue reading, you're welcome to. We're going to read chapter 7 tomorrow, but go in and work on your Animal Farm allegory chart, and we should have added, and I'll make sure to put into the agenda what animals you should add. Obviously, Napoleon, Squealer, Boxer are our main ones, but I'll make sure probably even the Seven Commandments because it's going to be altered. So at least those four, but you'll see in the agenda what we will be adding to that. Once you're done with that, make sure you're finding the pictures. You should have that done probably. You have plenty of time to do that today. And then we will be continuing to read tomorrow. If you get done early, work on other assignments, watch the news that's provided to you all, and enjoy the rest of your day. I'll be available in the Google Meet if you have questions. Thanks, guys.